down on prey, we're gaining ground. Glory, hallelujah, the dead's alive and the lost is found. Glory, hallelujah.
Welcome back again to Eschatology Matters. I'm your host, Josh Howard, and we're starting off with our first interview of the 2024 calendar year. So I'm going to encourage you again, if you have not already, go to eschatologymatters.org. That's sort of a central hub for us at Eschatology Matters. You can keep up with the various projects we have going on. You can find links to all of the podcasts, the video interviews, everything we have done there. I want to especially thank those who have become members there at Eschatology Matters. If you're interested in that and having some exclusive member content, you can check out those various membership tiers that are available through the website. I want to also give a big thanks to our ongoing sponsors, among whom I would name Squirrely Joe's Coffee. I saw that Squirrely Joe's had a big design redo in 2024. Hopefully the coffee is still on point, but check out Squirrely Joe's. We're appreciative of them and of their ongoing efforts and helping us here at Eschatology Matters. But today I'm joined by one that I've been waiting for quite a while. Very glad to have Aaron Ren on the show. Aaron, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to put this at the front end, Aaron. I'll make sure to reiterate this at the back end, but I'm forgetful. But if you're not following Aaron Ren, check him out. I follow him on X, which is kind of I think how I first became acquainted with your work. But you can follow him at Aaron_Ren. That's RENN. That's on X. But also check out his newsletter, which is at AaronRen.com, which is where a lot of his content comes out. But Aaron, give us a little background, kind of where you're coming from, what you're up to, and you're working through American Reformer, but yeah, just a little bit of intro, if you would.
So, sure. I live in Indianapolis. I'm a writer and consultant. I focus on the future of the evangelical church, but really with an emphasis on men's issues. I really got interested in this because I saw that men were not going to church. They weren't turning to churches all that much, but they were turning to people like Jordan Peterson and Joe Rogan and Andrew Tate. And actually, those guys weren't around when I started back in 2013 looking into this. But I saw the earlier versions of them bubbling up and really wanted to get in the game. But prior to that, I was a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute. I had a kind of a career in public policy, looking at kind of urban policy, state and local policy. And then prior to that, I was in management consulting with Accenture for a very long time. And again, today I do a lot of writing and journalism on a variety of platforms, a little bit of consulting as well. And the main project I'm working on right now is my new book called Life in the Negative World, Confronting Challenges in an Anti-Christian Culture, which comes out from Zondervan Reflective on January 30th. So looking forward to that. And of course, people can buy that. It'd be great appreciated.
Perfect. And that's carrying on from the First Things article, I'm assuming, from February?
Yes. So I wrote that February 22 article, The Three Worlds of Evangelicalism, that was one of the most popular articles in the history of the magazine, certainly the biggest article of 2022 from the print edition. That has really become viral and really helped shape how evangelicals think about the world we're in. It's actually an updated version of something I put in my newsletter in 2017. And the initial framework I developed in 2014. So this is something that I've been thinking about for a long time, but it really sort of as it germinated. Then with the First Things article, I think the combination of, my ideas and sort of events in the world intersected to make it something that people were very interested in at that time.
Okay, perfect. No, I'll be looking for that book to come out. I'd like to talk more about the three worlds kind of paradigm, but I'd like you to give a little intro to American Reformer. Just what are you guys up to at American Reformer? You serve there as, I believe, the co-founder at American Reformer.
Yeah, American Reformer is a Protestant-oriented nonprofit that I helped co-found, and I'm a senior fellow there. And really, I did that because a lot of entrepreneurship starts from scratching your own itch or solving your own problem, as they say. And I had a problem in that I didn't have a good place to do my work. The Manhattan Institute is a great entity. It's a conservative think tank in New York, but it's very aggressively secular. They're not going to have any religious work being done there. And that's really the case, frankly, with most of the kind of conservative political think tank world. Many of the evangelical entities and, publications really weren't aligned with my way of thinking. They're sort of very tribal publications. And so I thought there was a need for a voice that was really clearly and distinctly Protestant in the market, and that was going to be focused on, again, what I called the negative world, where this era we're in today, where for the first time in the 400-year history of America, elite culture views Christianity negatively. So we have a few things ongoing. We have a journal, which is our own publication there. Of course, I've written for that. Many other people write for that. It's a lot of a mixture of sort of topical pieces as well as sort of in-depth scholarly pieces. We have a lot of, highly qualified, eminent PhDs and others writing pieces for us, although hopefully in an accessible way. We also, the thing that I think really distinguishes us is our reform work, where we actually partner with stakeholders in organizations to help them navigate this new world that we're in, and in many cases, push back against mission drift in these organizations. If we feel like they're going the wrong way and there are stakeholders who feel they're going the wrong way, we would help bring our expertise to bear on that. And we also have a fellowship for young leaders called the Cotton Mather Fellowship, which is great. And so that's sort of what we're doing. It's a mix of sort of, another thing, there's so much stuff going on, I can't keep it all straight. Thing I'm actually like super excited about is a center run by Jesse Ryan called the Center for Academic Faithfulness and Flourishing, which is really focusing on higher education and is a little more of a traditional think tank center in the sense that it's doing a lot of research there. So Jesse is the editor of a major peer-reviewed journal on Christian higher education, and we're working on a lot of interesting research and reports that I think you're going to love. Coming from a guy who's got really serious credentials in the space, and that's going to be a little more traditional think tank, if you will, because we want to have a diversity of things. We want to reach the public. We want to be doing real sort of grounded research, and we want to also be involved in our reform work. And I guess the last thing I'll hide is in our journal, and we've also done a number of investigative pieces that have gotten some good traction as well. So it's a mixture of the scholarly and the investigative.
No, that's good. That's helpful.
It's AmericanReformer.org. Check it out.
Perfect. And who are some of the? I'm trying to think of some of the contributors that you guys have. I know Time and Klein has contributed quite a bit. Who are some of the names that maybe people?
Yeah. So Time and Klein is definitely the editor of the journal. Prior to him taking over as the main editor, Ben Dunson was the founding editor. He's a PCA teaching elder and seminary professor, and he's still a contributor at the site. Colin Redeemer has contributed to the site. It's a Christian Winter. There's a long list of names. Megan Basham, who also writes for the Daily Wire, has done some investigative pieces there. Our executive director, Josh Abatoy, writes as well. There's a long roster of people. One of the things that we do is periodically post excerpts and transcripts of Revolutionary era sermons on different topics that people find interesting. So there's a lot of that. I would say there's a number. There's a lot of people. I don't remember all the names offhand, but sure. It would be like similar to like a First Things magazine in the sense that like every article is written by somebody different. We had a wide range of people who've written there.
Perfect. Yeah.
Scott Yenner, political scientist Scott Yenner, Joshua Mitchell from Georgetown University is another one who's written there. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. No, I know you mentioned Ben Dunson. I forgot to mention him at the beginning. He wrote at least one article that I'd read on. It was addressing cultural Christianity, which became kind of a hot button thing, and a couple of us have been engaging in that. Very helpful. But yeah, check out American Reformer. Tell us a little bit, Aaron. Tell us a little bit about you've walked people through the three worlds paradigm. If anybody hasn't read your article, I'd encourage them go read the article, February issue of First Things. But when you're looking at that and you're talking about us living in a negative world, I think a lot of people may think they know what you're talking about with negative world, especially, again, we're an eschatology channel. Many people that are tuning in here probably have certain conceptions of eschatology or negative world that are probably more let's just say culturally formed. We could think decades past in America and what eschatological kind of perspectives dominated there. But I think you're getting at something a little different. So if you could just kind of walk us into a little bit of what negative world looks like, or are we just talking to maybe the negative world that, people in the 70s or 80s might have been accustomed to? Because there's been some really helpful writing in this area. I know I'm thinking of Carl Trueman's recent book and some others that have kind of engaged similar themes. But walk us into that, Aaron.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways to think about, call it the decline of Christianity in America and the West. Charles Taylor wrote his book Secular Age, sort of told like a 500-year narrative of that outworking. There's a lot of different ways to slice that apple. But what I basically said is look, in the United States, we essentially had a softly institutionalized generic Protestantism in the country from its settlement, in the early 1600s up through, the 1950s, when we were adding "In God We Trust" to our money and "Under God" to the Pledge of Allegiance, and they were lighting up the skyline of New York with crosses for Easter. And we had, which was called at that time, the Protestant establishment, the WASPs, the White Anglo-Saxon Protestants. Then in the 1960s, this really started to go into decline. Church attendance started going into decline, personal adherence started going into decline, and sort of social acceptance of Christian morality began to be called into question. And that period of decline from, say, 64 all the way to the present I divide that into three eras or worlds that I call the positive, the neutral, and the negative world. Positive, 64, 94, Christianity's in decline. And I want to make that clear because I don't think it was necessarily clear in the original article. That's not a time when everything's going well for Christianity. It's a period of decline, but Christianity is still basically viewed positively.
Okay.
94 to 2014 is what I call the neutral world. Christianity is not viewed positive anymore. It's not viewed negatively either. It's just one more lifestyle choice among any. Then starting in 2014, we enter this, again, unprecedented era that I call the negative world, when for the first time in the 400-year history of our country, kind of official elite culture is now negative towards Christianity. Christian moral norms are expressly repudiated and, in fact, treated as perhaps the leading threat to the new public moral order. And this is very disconcerting to many Christians who grew up thinking that America was sort of a Christian country, particularly if you're a boomer, maybe even Gen X type person. Now, where eschatology comes in is I do not see the advent of the negative world as the advent of the end times in any material sense. And in fact, one of the things I talk about in my book is going into a negative world doesn't mean Christianity is doomed in America. And you sometimes get that sense from other writers. And, one of them, a guy I love a lot, Rod Dreher, he gives off that sense a lot. He's like, one of his favorite books is The Final Pagan Generation, I think it's called. It's by a California academic. And it talks about this kind of the last generation of pagans in Rome before Christianity sort of took over and all that. And it's a great book, by the way. It tells a lot of interesting things. I learned a lot from it. But there's this kind of sense that, there might be a going out of business sale for Christianity. So I think there is this sort of apocalyptic thinking and times thinking. An example, I give this example in my book, is look at the Copts of Egypt. It was 639 AD when the Muslim Arab invaders conquered Egypt, and they're still in charge. But guess what? The Christians of Egypt are still there. 5 to 10% of Egypt is still Christian. In fact, there may be more Christians in Egypt now than there actually were at the time of the Muslim conquest. So things have not been good for them for, the last however many hundred, 1,600 years or however many, 1,400 years, how long that is. But they're still there and they can still be faithful. And it didn't mean that the world was ending. And I think we can lose sight of that historical perspective. It might have seemed during the Muslim expansions of the 600s that, the apocalypse was nigh, but that was not true.
No, that's super helpful, especially with so really what you're aiming at with the three worlds conception is all of those are descriptive of Christianity in decline within Western culture or American culture.
Right, within American culture specifically. It's a cultural diagnostic. It's not a theological diagnostic by any means. It's not a theological analysis of anything.
Right.
Which is, I'm not necessarily qualified to give.
Right. So
Uh,
I'm curious though, because you kind of hinted at it when we were chatting just briefly before we started recording. I'm curious how you've seen eschatology play in with that conception, because typically, I mean, just to put it out there on the table, you talking about a negative world, I think plays into a lot of people's preconceptions that things are going to get bad, and they're probably going to get bad within my lifetime. And they're probably going to get cataclysmically bad to the point where the only thing that will right that ship is Christ returning. And I'm not, necessarily mocking those conceptions, but it's interesting what you're laying out, because especially with the illustration of the Coptic Christians, you're looking at something that is, this is a not even hundreds of years. This is a millennia long type viewpoint. How
right.
have you seen those interactions between eschatology and this viewpoint or this description that you're
Yeah. Well, let me give you a little bit of background on me. So I grew up in rural Southern Indiana in a, Assemblies of God church. It was definitely marinated in the premillennial dispensationalist system. We definitely, in our church had this sense that this was in the 70s and 80s. Okay. So we're thinking that the end times are here, Cold War, late great planet Earth, all that stuff's going to happen. And then the Soviet Union collapsed. And I think after the Soviet collapse, in 89, fall of the Berlin Wall, a lot of the wind went out of the sails of that. And yes, there's still sort of the Left Behind books. There's still a lot of and there's still a lot of talk about prophecy. You go look at like the number one, newsletter or the number one podcast to Christianity out there. It's some kind of prophecy thing. So it's still sort of there. But I think the imminent return of Christ kind of pre-mill view is not what it once was, where when you sort of had the, refoundation of the secular state of Israel in 1948, you had the Soviet Union and this, all the stuff here, it seemed like it was happening. And now it's sort of a different story. And in fact, if you look at evangelicals have never been more supportive of Israel than they are today. And unlike when I was a kid, there is no eschatological significance to the vast majority of evangelical support for Israel. So yes, there are some people out there. I know there are different groups who, for example, there's one group of people that takes evangelical volunteers to harvest grapes in the West Bank for free from Jewish farmers, because there's some prophecy in Isaiah or something like that about how, foreigners will go. So they're trying to like accelerate the process here a little bit. But, by and large, it's just strictly a secularized support to the extent that it's theological. It's all rooted in, something like, those who bless you out, you will bless; those who curse you will curse. Some sort of, sense of the Jews as God's chosen people, or those promises, but not about end times, which is very different. Whereas I think there was an end time significance to Israel in the 70s and 80s that's not present today. So I think that has sort of waned. And by and large, those people have not engaged with my work. Primarily, I don't think they read magazines like First Things. I think it's sort of its own kind of world. Where there's been a lot of interaction has been from the more kind of, call it modern postmillennialist approach. So to me, postmillennialism was the eschatology of liberal Protestantism. And if you go back to, the late 19th century, that was sort of the sophisticated view to hold. And there was a lot of reasons for that. We had Industrial Revolution, the advent of electric lighting, the telegraph, the telephone. We're decoding the secrets of the universe with physics. Think about like Einstein's theory of relativity. It did seem like, heaven was sort of coming to earth, in a sense. And then World War I think, really, and then of course World War II, really sort of derailed that version of postmillennialism. And, that sort of triumphalistic postmillennialist view sort of went away. But now you've got a lot of, I don't know how many of them there are, but, they're very vocal. You've got this sort of post-millennial camp around people like Doug Wilson. I can't trace all of its origins. Wilson came out of a Christian Reconstruction background, but they have a sort of a different sort of post-millennialist point of view that underpins a lot of what they do. They're definitely transformationalist. Definitely a highly impressive set of accomplishments in Moscow, Idaho. If you've ever been out there, no, they don't view the world as suddenly going to be transformed for Christ imminently by anything, but they've got that sort of view that the gospel is going to conquer the world. It's going to, inaugurate the millennial kingdom, all of that sort of stuff.
Mm.
They have tended to I think, the negative world. They've been positive towards it, but I think where I think most of the eschatology has come in specifically is people who accuse me or others associated with American Reformer of taking a political position around Christian nationalism that is rooted in a sort of post-millennialist vision, which is actually not true. I mean, I've written articles, multiple things I've said that I'm not a Christian nationalist, and American Reformer takes no position. We've written a number of things critical of Christian nationalism, and I don't think most of the people in American Reformer, certainly in the kind of the core group, are post-millennialist. But basically, if you're not reconciled to Christians becoming essentially second-class citizens in America, and the idea that we should just essentially totally surrender in a culture wars, you're going to be accused of post-millennialist. That seems to be the thing out there. And so, it's not per se a reaction to me, but basically, if you look at a lot of people today, they'll talk about, Jesus didn't come to claim power, he came to give up power. It's very, very it's very Anabaptist inflected. And so many, especially these urban Christians, they take this point of view that as a Christian, you should be radically about giving up power. You shouldn't be standing up for yourself, basically. You should be radically serving the other. And in my view, Stephen Wolfe, who wrote the book, The Case for Christian Nationalism, he diagnosed this correctly in saying that this approach that they are taking is basically an attempt to politically neutralize Christianity to make it safe for toleration in these areas. So if you're an evangelical in New York City, you want the people there not to perceive you as a threat. And so you talk about this radical serving of others and everything. You never say anything that's going to get you in trouble. And the whole point is to essentially let the powers that be know, hey, please leave us alone. We're not going to threaten anything that you want to do. And anybody who's not willing to go along with that is going to get accused of being a Christian nationalist, a post-millennialist, something, because they don't like that. And so that's where I think a lot of the eschatology comes in. And I do think it's interesting that people talk a lot in terms of eschatology. One thing that I have in common with Stephen Wolfe is that I'm very much someone who draws out of what I would call anthropology rather than eschatology. That is to say, I'm interested in seeing how this world has been created, exploring creation and drawing conclusions about things based on an exploration of creation and an outworking of creation rather than deducing something from the end times. And so that very much informs my work. I don't have there is nothing in my work that is an exposition of what you might call traditional eschatology. Now, there's an important exception. The guy who wrote a post for my site, his name was Benjamin Mabry. He's a PhD political scientist from LSU. And he makes this point about scripture. He's like, and he was criticizing the book, The Scandal of the Evangelical Mind by Mark Knoll. Because Mark Knoll, he points out something in the book that's actually true, is that Mark Knoll treats the eschatological passages, particularly in the Old Testament, as essentially a metaphor of God's redemptive patterns of the world. He doesn't treat it as a literal event. And Mabry's point is that eschatology is a fundamental standpoint of Scripture. And the idea here, and I agree, is that we all need to live our lives with the understanding that we are going to give an account at the end times, that there is going to be a judgment, that there is going to be that, and that Christ could return any minute. I mean, rather than like reading the signs, we have to be thinking, okay, right now, Christ could return and we would have to give an account for our lives. And living our life in that standpoint, that eschatological standpoint is very important. So that's number one area in which I think that I do take an eschatological approach. I'm trying to do my work and saying I've been given certain gifts and talents. How do I invest those talents to generate a return? Because there's going to be a judgment on that return. I mean, we're going to be, I gave you these things. What are you doing? So I think that's a very important principle of sort of eschatology. The other important principle of eschatology that it's very hard for me to relate to, but which I think is critically important, and I'm very influenced by Charles Taylor in this, is the idea that ultimate value is not in this life. Ultimate value is to be placed in the age to come. That we're to be storing up treasures in heaven, that there are values beyond human flourishing in the here and now. But of course, by human flourishing, you could think of that. Charles Taylor would say it would basically mean health and wealth, right? Peace and prosperity in the now that came to eclipse the supernatural, the sort of supernatural transcendental values that people might have, and became all there is. And we can very much live in that reality, because I think part of it is we have to realize that this world is important. I don't think we want to have this escapist view of this world, but the ultimate, we have to be, we do have to be thinking about where is our treasure, where are the values, that you can sacrifice now. You can deny yourself now in the service of higher values in the life to come, which is where the primary fulfillment of God's promises are to be suspected. So I think those two ways of thinking about the world eschatologically are ones I aspire to live by, that I think really are relevant, even if you don't take a perspective on the end times per se, as I don't. Again, I tend to be very anthropological, if you will.
No, that's super helpful. And just thinking through what you're saying there at the end, there's almost always a ditch on either side. And so on the one hand, you've got those who would unnaturally bifurcate, sort of that Gnostic view, right? Like there's the physical and the spiritual, and never the two shall meet. What I do is only heavenly, and it has nothing to do with this world. But then you have the other ditch on the other side, which is everything, in this world is what truly matters. So I think it's excellent what you say. I would point this out, Aaron, just in camaraderie with you, is that certainly with the postmillennialism, with the liberal Protestants, but I have to protest. We can't lay postmillennialism at their feet any more than I would lay premillennialism at the feet of somebody like Hal Lindsey. But yeah, they've definitely had that history with some who have gone errantly with that view. I'm curious if you can walk us through looking to 2024. I'm assuming you guys will have plenty to write about this year.
Sure.
I said looking to 20. We're in 2024 now. Good grief. But looking to this year, it could be eventful. I don't think anybody has to claim, a gift of prophecy to put their nose to the wind and say that we can smell things that are happening. How does that kind of conception sort of kind of your whole project, not just the three worlds, but including that, what sort of kind of boots to the ground advice are you looking to give people who are looking to 2024? They're seeing cultural shifts, and I'm thinking really to Christians, right? We're thinking of Christians in America. They're seeing cultural shifts. They're seeing challenges. They're trying to navigate these waters. What sort of areas would you maybe? I'm not asking for like a catch-all silver bullet answer to to all the problems in America, but like, what are some kind of general guidelines or general direction posts that you would give people looking to where we are? Kind of, which is what you've done, is situating us where we're at, why things have slid, why things are going the way they seem to be going, and what we can kind of be looking to in the future with that.
Well, this is why people should buy Life in the Negative World, my new book, because about 25% of the book is dedicated to a sort of expanded and refined view of my three worlds pieces, the diagnostic. The last 75% is devoted to how shall we live now. And I give a set of starter ideas across three dimensions, what I call the personal, the institutional, and the missional. Because I think those are sort of three different dimensions. But the main thing that I say is to understand that we're in a sort of uncertain, highly volatile territory. And therefore, we're going to have to adopt a posture of exploration. We are going into the unknown and unfamiliar territory. And I contrast this with what Bill Hybels did back in the 1970s when he founded Willow Creek Church and essentially invented the seeker sensitivity movement as we understand it. He did draw on precursors. I'm not saying it all sprung fully formed from the brow of Bill Hybels here, but he went door to door in suburban Chicago asking people, why don't you go to church? Actually, ask them, do you go to church? If they did go to church, conversation over. If they don't go to church, why do you go to church? And all these people gave him, as he said, they gave me an earful of all the things they didn't like about church. And so he designed a church to appeal to people that didn't want to go to church because of all these other objectives. He's like, look, we're going to get rid of stodgy hymns and robes and all that. We're going to have contemporary music. It's going to be informal. We're going to get rid of all these creeds and denominational cruft. It's going to be very therapeutic and topical in sort of its approach. And very comfortable. It's going to be like an auditorium. You're not going to be like you're in some, neo-Gothic cathedral sort of thing. And so essentially he was able to create like a startup plan, a business plan, do some market research, find out where the existing incumbent industries are not serving the market well. What's the niche I can serve? And then create a product to appeal to them. That's the sort of thing a consultant would do. And that's the sort of thing businesses do. Yes, we can probably still do that some of the time. I'm not saying we could never do that. But coming to this negative world, like, what are we supposed to do? I don't know. What's it going to look like at the end of 2024?
Right.
If there's one thing we've seen in, the last few years in this negative world, is just how topsy-turvy everything is. I mean, at the beginning of 2015, not a single person in America, not even Donald Trump himself, thought Donald Trump was going to be the next president of the United States. Then we had this pandemic that sort of turned our world upside down. Then we have, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, a whole bunch of crazy things happened there. So there's always crazy things happening. And so we're not going to be able to have control. We're not going to be able to depend on our plans. And we're going to have more dependence on God, more of an exploration mindset. The example I give is, when the Hebrews were getting ready to cross the Jordan River and enter the Promised Land, this is a group of people that never knew anything but the desert. Now they're going into this unknown country. They've never been there before. They've never seen it. They know it's got great stuff, but they know it's populated with very fearsome people who are not going to give it up without a fight. And there's this line in Joshua where, God tells follow the ark because you have not been this way before. So you just got to follow the ark, follow God's drag, because you're not going into something that you know how to deal with. You're going into the unknown. And that's us now. We're going into the unknown. And that calls for a different posture and a different way of thinking about the world. And I think that's the most fundamental way to think about it. And so, I'll just give you one. I have a number of ideas in the book, and I'm going to be writing on my newsletter a lot of ideas over the course of 2024. It's not going to be a comprehensive plan because there ain't no such thing.
Right.
But, one of the things I had to say is, we got to make a decision about do we actually believe this stuff and are we actually going to do it? And so that's what are they like? How serious about our faith are we? Because, in what I labeled the positive world, you still got social credit. It helped your social credit score to be known as a good church-going man. He's involved in the Rotary Club. He goes to, First Baptist Church. He's, married. He's got these kids. Let's hire this guy.
Mm-hmm.
Today, it doesn't help you for sure, and it might actually hurt you. And so I don't like to say that we're facing persecution because I don't really think we're facing persecution. I interviewed on my podcast last year Andrew Brunson, who was this Presbyterian missionary in Turkey who spent 2 years falsely imprisoned in Turkey, if you remember his case. That's a guy who experienced persecution, right? People in China are experiencing persecution. People in North Korea are experiencing persecution. We're not experiencing that. However, our society does have ways of putting subtle but very real pressure on people to force them in directions. And as I like to say, Paul wrote about I was shipwrecked, I was beaten with rods, I was stoned, all these things he talks about. But you know what? nobody ever took away his ability to earn a living as a tent maker. But losing your job because you say something wrong on social media, that's like a real possibility today.
Right.
Maybe it won't happen to more than a handful of people, but it's a real possibility today for us in ways that are not. So part of it is we have to decide, are we actually, we read all these things in the Bible. I count all things as loss for the surpassing worth of Christ. Count the cost before you start building the tower. Take it, all these things. Well, we read it and it's sort of like, it's always seemed like kind of vague and like, yeah, I believe that. But like, let's be honest, and not a day-to-day concern for most people. Well, now it may not be something that people have to face. You're probably not going to end up like Paul in the Philippian jail here, but you are going to be like, wow, maybe there's a cost, some sort, even if it's just a social cost. Am I prepared for that? And so I think that is there. And I say a lot. I come back to Sermon on the Mount, where at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus tells the story about two people, the person who built his house on the rock and the person who built his house in the sand. And what's the difference between the two? The person who built his house on the rock is the person who hears Jesus's words and does them. And so I think we actually have to take things a lot more serious, right? It's not just about listening on Sunday. Are we actually going to do this stuff? And it's unpopular to talk about that today because it's, well, we don't want to do any works. We're not saved by works. You're not doing a work over there, right? And it's, well, yeah, you actually do have to do some works. I mean, it's right there. And it says, if, when the storm comes. Now, we've been sitting here in sunny weather and there hasn't been a flood. And so it's not until that flood comes that you know where your foundation is. Warren Buffett, the famous investor, has this line: it's not till the tide goes out that you find out who's been swimming naked. And I think there's an element of that here. It's not till the flood waters come that you know where your foundation has been built out of. And so, we've been sitting here in sunny skies, and now I don't know if the flood's going to hit, but I can see some clouds on the horizon. And so I think it behooves all of us to think very seriously about upon which we've built, what foundation have we built our edifice of faith upon? Right.
No, that's so good. I was reading over the Christmas break about I think the death count was over 200 in Nigeria. And so you look at those pictures of real persecution, but like you said, just a sort of different sort of pressure, I think, on Western culture or American, let's say American Christianity. Your book's out on, you said January 30th, so that should give everybody
January 30th.
That should give everybody enough time then to read That Hideous Strength from C.S. Lewis.
Yes.
And read your book. Those should pair well together. No, this is super interesting. I'm curious and this might be a little bit too sideways, but just kind of bear with me on this, because you've written a lot on the city, right, and on small towns. As somebody who lives in the Midwest, it kind of grips me because there's something just unique about Midwestern small towns, and you have the little city center and the little roundabout, and it's just different than a lot of the cities in the South that I used to live in. So I'm curious how you see this. Is this a different experience between city and country? There's been a lot of discussion in Christian circles, and it's not just a postmillennial thing or a theonomic thing, but there's been a lot of discussion on how to engage within the city or within the countryside or kind of rural areas. Obviously, Tim Keller had a lot to do with that and the whole in the city for the city movement, and now there's been kind of it seems a little bit of a reaction against that. But what are some of the things just in general that you have seen with that? Obviously, I know you're writing a lot on that. I wouldn't ask you to summarize all of it, and I'd love for people to keep up with what you're writing. But just in general, what are some kind of themes or trends that you're seeing there that might be encouraging or might be challenging in this kind of in the midst of this negative world construction that you're kind of painting?
Sure. Well, I grew up in an extremely rural area in southern Indiana, and I spent most of my adult life in big cities, Chicago and New York. And so I feel like I know, both sides of that coin. I think the diversity of environments is one reason there's no one size fits all strategy for what to do. A lot of it's going to depend where you are. And the negative world is here. It's just not evenly distributed. So, and certainly in some places in rural southern Indiana, like where I grew up, it's still the positive world in some ways, in that, you're not going to get, a pie in the face for being a conservative Christian. Now, that doesn't mean that there hasn't been a tremendous decline in sort of Christian adherence, norms, et cetera, and that all the things of society are there, but it's just a different social environment. And I would say, you have to assess, your personality, your conscience, your financial circumstances, your skills, credentials, etc., in making a decision about what careers to enter and about what, where places to live. Because certain places like, Manhattan, there are going to be more intense pressures in Manhattan on the negative world than they're going to be in Laconia, Indiana, where I grew up. Now, on the other hand, I one of the things that I differ with some of the city people on is actually I think Manhattan is one of the safest places you can live because it's so big, it's so anonymous. You're not running into people on the street, by and large. The most elite locations like that often are very open-minded for people having different ideas. It's a more genuinely tolerant environment. New York is also what Tony Carnes called a post-secular city, in a sense. New York, I think, has long been more religion-friendly than many other cities. I think in part because there are so many Jewish people there and a lot of Orthodox Jews. And so, they've always done things like the schools are off on the Jewish holidays. And there's an understanding, hey, a lot of people they're going to honor the Sabbath. They're not going to work on Saturdays. And they're going to keep kosher. And so this idea that like religion is part of your identity and, you can kind of fly your flag is kind of part of New York culture a little bit. Now, that doesn't say you can't get sideways with that. But you come here actually to, I think, some of these second tier cities where it's what the internet guys call the hick libs. That's where it actually becomes much more intolerant, actually, than New York. So in essence, I think the Upper West Side of New York, where I lived, is a more tolerant environment than downtown Indianapolis in a lot of ways. But you have to think about that. You have to think about those things in terms of where you live. But again, I also might talk about like if you live in like rural middle of nowhere, how are you going to earn a living? Are you actually going to enjoy living there? There's a lot of people who talk about homesteading and like, having lived in rural America, I don't have any romantic illusions about the reality of what that's like, right? Or what farming is like. Once you've castrated a calf, all of your illusions are gone, right? And it's like, we heated our house with wood. I'm out there cutting wood and by splitting wood and a garden and planting tobacco and all that stuff. And it's nice. I mean, I like it. I mean, I do like I like to have access to rural. But if I literally lived kind of off the grid somewhere, I don't know that I would like that. So I live in suburban Indianapolis. That's where I've chosen to live. Because I'm from the state. It's culturally simpatico. It is a solid red state. It is in a sort of more middle America environment. It is more religion friendly here. The place I live is still Republican. I mean, not everybody who's a Christian is a Republican. I'm not one of those people who says you had to be, but I happen to be. And, it's a place for somebody such as myself who kind of has to take out of the norm opinions to make a living. This is a place that I've chosen to live. And so we just have to think, it's not that you can't do anything. There are a lot of people to whom a Manhattan or downtown Indiana, there's going to be great places to live. But you need to think about what is right for you. It has to be an intentional choice in a way that in the past, you didn't have to think about things like, okay, what does this mean? And of course, all these other dimensions of my life.
Yeah, it seems like that's been one of the big shifts that I've been picking up on is that people seem to be thinking a lot more about it than they used to, maybe, which sounds pretty simple, but just whereas used to, it didn't seem like the choice was so distinct.
There objectively is political migration in America.
Right.
I don't know if you call it religious migration, but there's political migration 100% happening.
Right. Yeah. Well, Aaron, this has been a blast, and I'm appreciative of your time. I'll encourage everybody to follow you, Aaron_Ren on X, newsletter at aaronren.com, and remind me of the book on January 30th.
Life in the Negative World.
Life in the Negative World. Awesome. And by all means, check out that First Things article back in February. But Aaron, this has been great, and I appreciate you jumping on and swimming the waters of eschatology with us today.
Thanks for having me.
All right.
Seated here at my right hand, the